Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I'm recording. Just letting
Right.
you know. How are
Right.
you?
I'm good. I'm just gonna fiddle with it a bit so that I can see myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it's a pleasure. You have an impressive resume, and I've been, kind of obsessed with the book for the past few days. So I'm really glad to be able to talk to you about it, and just chat with you. I kind of avoided watching any of the other ones. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just want to ask you when you say obsessed with it, just mean really interested in it.
Meaning that I haven't stopped thinking about it.
Okay.
Um, because one of the difficult things about it is that I can't sort of make a definitive statement about like what's right and what's wrong and who's the hero and who's the villain, and but I think that's what is good about it, is that it leaves me with that ambivalence, which I think, because it's so tragic, and it's like you want, this guy's life was family life was horrible. It was like, he arrives on Earth, and to a situation where the parents are already overwhelmed. The father's an alcoholic. The mother, you know, sort of descends into becoming an emotionally and physically abusive. When I was reading it, I was like, well, maybe he's the bad guy and she's the good guy, and then she becomes eventually physically abusive, and pitting the children against each other. I mean, it's very dense and it's very intense, and it's like, the child in me wants to rescue the child of Brian, and I just think, and I like the way it's structured. I mean, it sort of begins. I mean, the title itself is a bit deceptive, but it also reminds you, as you go in and start to sort of humanly sympathize with this human, kind of, you're reminded that two were found, couple was found slain. I
Yeah.
mean, I think there's a bit of genius there, and that, okay, we have not forgotten that. So I'm just going to rant about it. I don't want to
Okay.
give it away, but I just, because it's so disturbing, and you want to find these answers. Um, but that's what makes it compelling. And I just wanted to sort of say thanks for telling his story, because I'm so many forgotten people in wherever, suffering in silence, and the fact of the family was, the illness was so, protected by, remember when they went to a therapist's office, the father had sort of a um, pat answers to, I mean, how a family can leave have a front of
Yeah.
normalcy, and then within it have very sick things going on physically and emotionally, and just and that and just, I mean, it's just very tragic. So I'm a little overwhelmed, but I think that's why it's an important story. And I think so, yeah. And also, with I grew up in an alcoholic family, and uh and I always knew it was going to affect me some way, and I was like, I want to talk about it, I want to be open about it, I want to get this all out. And I had a friend in high school who had probably even a worse situation, where his mother kind of attempted suicide in front of him when he was a child, and it was just a horrifying situation. And he ended up, trying to take over the counter sleeping pills to kill himself. But when that didn't work, he walked across the street with a can of gasoline and matches and set himself on fire. And that was like, and when I was with him in drama class, we both said, you know, we're both from alcoholic families, and I was like, I want to get this all out because I feel like it's gonna like make me crazy, you know, and I want to, you know, not keep it a secret or at least talk about it and work through it. He was like, I don't want to talk about it at all, and he ended up like taking himself out. So, you know, it hits home for me. Like 7 years ago, I was in the hospital, and I really needed to do the 12 steps and have some kind of a spiritual connection with a creator that I, you know, hated because
Did you stop drinking then when you were younger?
I what did I start or stop?
Start. I mean, did you become alcoholic too?
Yeah, but I didn't drink in high school, and then I came to New York, and then when my sort of dreams of becoming, you know, professional filmmaker sort of were not being met with the rest of the world, and the school, you know, I think I felt I wanted to connect with people. Then I started drinking then, but I didn't. And then I quit 2 years into my marriage because my wife wanted me to, and then I was sort of going to ACOA meetings, but I never did the steps. I didn't want to deal with the God thing and all that stuff. It just was like, but then I bottomed out, you know, emotionally and spiritually, 7 years dry, as they call it. And then I was hospitalized, and I went through the medication thing. You know, my wife thought it was, you know, chemical imbalance, and so did the doctors. And I was like, okay, just, but I kind of secretly knew I needed to do these steps or I would be, um, and a therapist knew that too. I finally got a therapist who understood alcoholism and that it was a, you know, physical, mental, and spiritual disease. And I hadn't let the physical dimension of the disease get as far as most people, you know. And I had been treating it through just either going to meetings and talking, and but the mental was still there. And so yeah, and I, you know, and I was, you know, hospitalized in 1996. That was my first hospitalization, and I was there for a couple of weeks. And so when I was reading when he first got to the hospital, you know, bells went off. But I wanted to say, you know, there's a whole, like when I first met a guy who was like, they called him like Joey Psycho or whatever. I was like afraid, you know, even though I had grown up with like alcoholism and a crazy mother, and I never knew what was going to go on. I think, you know, it's not so much, it's the unpredictability of the abuse. I think that's what causes kind of the emotional disruption of like not feeling safe in the world or not having this primal trust in the outside. And I think that can help, that can make people like retreat within as if it's a safer place within, and then the demons from within come out, and then you're really in trouble when it's dangerous within yourself and dangerous outside. That's when things can get really, and when you know, and I did a lot of, you know, trying to like put it, my, you know, use film and music as therapy to with either suicidal ideation or whatever when things got bad. And then, but then when I felt, you know, I couldn't keep it together, I would admit myself and sort of let them do what they needed to do, but then kind of like say, look, I got to do these steps and stuff. And even though I was 7 years without alcohol, I mean, that's the cunning, baffling, powerful nature of it. It's like people are trying to treat this with the substance, and everyone's looking at the substance rather than, and then in a hospital, like there's no, like, I mean, there's a spiritual dimension to it, but it's like, I mean, it's so baffling at that point. It's like it's a higher power of your own understanding. It's super personal, and I'm like, you know, and so then it gets messy too. It's like which God are you gonna choose, or you know, and is it, and even a spiritual path doesn't mean there's that you're safe there either. There are,
Yeah.
you know, there's darkness there, and it's like has a lot to do with fear. I mean,
Yeah.
people don't want to talk about fear and how we deal with fear.
Yeah.
That's
And
my spiel.
I think one of the big problems that Brian has is that, like, his main, what gives him hope and strength is his religion, but he can't talk about that because
Yeah.
that's used against him, and that becomes like a symptom of his psychosis. And you're right that like a hospital is like the last place you need to be when you're going through that kind of crisis, because it's more like a spiritual or existential humanitarian crisis. And it's not about, the organic body, and it's not about medicine or um, physiological deficits. And you don't want to be in a place which is like all about science. And if there were still places that, like asylums, that would maybe be a better place to be. But now it's just like hospitals and prisons, and there's nothing really in between. But this isn't really a hospital.
Yeah, and he even makes the case when he acts as his own lawyer that you can't show me a physical measurement of like here's where my illness was at this point, and now that it's here it's
Yeah,
all like signs and symbols. It's all behavior,
yeah,
which is really subjective. It can all be pathologized looking through that lens.
yeah. And
Um,
this nebulous thing called thought content, that doesn't manifest itself in any signs outside of the mind. So it's your thought content that's causing you to be schizophrenic. But how, what, psychiatrists don't have a supernatural power to read people's minds and understand their thought content. And if it's not manifesting itself outside of the mind, then what harm is it to anyone anyway? And no one can be imprisoned for their thought content. Well, they are.
yeah, the thing, and I'm always like, because I think when I think of mental illness and thoughts, I think of like because I think I have an emotional illness, and I think that the primary is like fear, and the fear I felt as a helpless child when my mother was raging and I didn't know. And this is the woman who brought me into the earth, and she could take me out, I guess. And I completely bought, as a child, I completely bought into her world, that the world was ending, and it was all emotional. And she was, people can get high over rage, and like and this, it gives them it covers the fear and the terror that anyone facing, the void, or that we're, or these ideas that we live in a chaotic, these existential fears, I mean. And to have a child, like, I mean,
Your mother
Brian
probably,
was born and the nurses called him Prince Charming, and it's beautiful. And it's like, what came of that is,
yeah, it's, but don't you think your mother probably believed she was doing a good job? And, you know,
I don't
the,
know. I think I think no, she was, I had done something wrong, and it completely disrupted her sense of, and it was the end of the world in an emotional way, where the world is your mother, and so it was an emotional intoxication. So it's like, but maybe that's, and my thoughts always, like, my emotions become first, and then my thoughts sort of give them form.
yeah,
I didn't really, like, music spoke to me, like when I would hear a song, and I would, it would resonate with the sadness or the loneliness, and I felt communion with music, and not so much the words, but where the melody took my spirit and my soul. But I mean, as far as the medical community, there is no spirit and soul, and it's like, I mean, it's a swamp. It's like,
yeah,
what I mean? I mean, that's what's so like tragic and weird, and like frustrating about it. Because if we could all agree that this is the soul, or this is the spirit, and this is what it needs, and this is the God, and everybody tries to like make these physical representations of something that's kind of living within ourselves, like with our emotions and our instincts and our intuitions. And it was just, but I can understand that, after, building trust with someone who's committed, this crime, and the fact that he was walking around with a shotgun, it just was like, it was like a disaster waiting to happen, you know. And it was like, but he did, you know, I mean, it leaves me dumbfounded, you know. I stammer because it's so.
You know, I think that happens so often with families. Um, all the things that are not tolerated in the public sphere, like, you know, physical violence and racism and so on, abuse, behind closed doors, especially, you know, when you have a family that's overwhelmed with a lot of kids, like the kind of things that parents do to kids and that kids do to each other is horrifying. And yet, because the family is kind of sacrosanct in our society, um, if if it happens in the home to the family, is kind of not something that society gets involved in, the wider world gets involved in. That's kind of your private way of bringing up your children, and you're allowed to, you know, to discipline them, or maybe you believe in a certain religion. Like children, I think all kinds of, well, most of the homicides are committed in the family. I think we kind of overlook that. It's not strangers that kill people, it's, you know,
Yeah,
their loved ones that kill them.
I think, I mean, I decidedly decided I was not going to have children like very early on, and
Me
that I
too.
wanted to. And I think a lot of people are making that decision. I know that I recently saw the Lydia Lunch documentary by Beth B, and she was speaking at IFC after a screening a couple of Wednesdays ago, and she made it. From what I understood, is that she was like, I'm not, you know, not going to have children to not carry on this legacy, because I knew that that I would have carried on the rage and so forth, and I was like, I wouldn't want any child to go through a fraction of what I did
Yeah.
emotionally, and emotionally you can't measure it, so there's something, you know, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word, diabolical about it.
Usually, I mean, did you have a vasectomy? Because usually it's the men who don't get to choose. Because, like, I always said that too. Like, I'm
I
never
got
gonna.
lucky. What? Yeah.
And all my friends at the time, they also said, "Oh, we're not going to have kids too." But they're all guys, and now they all have kids because they married someone who wanted to have kids, and so it wasn't really up to them. But
Lust and love took over, you know, and
yeah,
it's like you can get possessed by being in love. Especially when I stopped drinking and I didn't do the steps, it's like, and find a higher power. You know, I know that sounds like it's like there is like, so it's like I became obsessed with a person, and I was like, oh my, it was the last person I wanted anything to do with. I didn't, you know, and it was like it was the person completely wrong for me, and I was like, I was, and but I, and I, you know, I took it as like I was being like possessed, and I was like, I need to make films about, and I made films, I wrote songs, and I tried to just sublimate, and it was like, um, and it was that inner child, like, you know, grabbing, like, if I don't have a higher power or whatever to treat that magical thinking child or whatever, you know, then it's gonna like, then I'm gonna latch onto some person and have this fantasy, you know, and it's like, and and
but
it
you're
was
lucky
like,
that you had that
what?
connection with music and with filmmaking. It's like a way of, I mean, I feel like that with writing. It's like a way of taking all this inchoate swamp and making order out of it. So,
Mhm.
and making some kind of objective correlate of how you feel inside, and often that connects with other people too. So, like that's more therapeutic, I think, than anything else. And it's, but not everyone has that.
Yeah, and I think it worked up until a certain point, and then I was really in trouble. But I was like, I knew, like, if I couldn't trust, you know, I was like, I could ideate about suicide all I wanted, but if I felt like I was a danger to someone else in any slight way, I was like, I need to go to the hospital and let them do whatever. And I was like, and that was right for me. And when I was medicated, I, you know, I did the steps with a sponsor, and, you know, thank God he didn't say, oh, well, you haven't drank for 7 years, I'm not going to do this with you. It's like he didn't need to hear my explanation of like, and I understand now that it actually helps him stay sober, and it's called being in fit spiritual condition. And they make a distinction between religion and spirituality, and that spirituality, they say a lot of times, is for people who have been through hell, and religion is for people who are afraid of hell. And it's, you know, it's a very private, personal thing, and it was me making peace with the void, or with the God that I hated. You know, as an atheist, I would claim, you know, I didn't believe in God for such things as, why would God allow something like the tragedy, what happened with his family? I mean, the whole thing, because it was riddled. It wasn't an isolated incident. He was in a sea of dysfunction. And dysfunction almost doesn't even describe it. I mean, because of the emotional and the psychic horror of it.
And again, this is not unique to that family, but I feel that, you know, often one of the children, and in this case Brian, will act out the kind of unspoken desires of the whole family.
Yeah.
And so the child is kind of like an unconsciously this mechanism that causes things to happen in the world, that either punishment for the family, or enacting some kind of unconscious desire. And I think that's what happened in this case.
Yeah. It was almost like a sacrifice of, like, I need to show the rest of the world how sick this family is, in a weird way. And I think you've done a great service in telling his story. And I think it was an act of love, you know, with a small L, not a big, you know. It was an act of compassion. And I hope it, in some way, it was healing for you and him. And it's like, it's, you know, we're only as sick as our secrets. Like, if we can speak about these things, if we can write about these things, if we can put them, like my friend Jeff would be like, you know, making art is civilizes us. If we can find some way to dissipate these, you know, internal horrors and pain and frustrations, and we can have our souls speak in some way, it sort of liberates us. And I think it just because the fear can constrict, you know, the spirit or the soul, and terror can constrict the spirit and the soul. And it's invisible, you know. It's like, and it's not measurable, you know.
One theory of how art, or the individual impulse to create art, occurs is that the first time that the child is left alone, that the parents go behind a closed door, maybe it's like their desire, they need to have sex for the first time after the kid's born, or something like that. That first moment when the kid's left outside alone, the child, if the child can like amuse itself and not need the parents, that's the impulse that goes to creating art. It's like creating your own world and your own internal version of your parents. And some kids can do that, like from a very early age, and then some can't, but they'll find other ways of doing it. Like Brian did it for a while with his martial arts. Like some kids can do it through sport, like finding some organizing activity that is an outlet for their impulses, so that they can kind of create some imaginative world for themselves, where they don't necessarily need others, and can some order to put these feelings in. But like you say, it doesn't always last, and there's still problems.
Yeah, it was like, you know, when I was in the hospital, the doctor was like, it's a perfect storm, meaning like it wasn't just one part of my life that's sort of one like leg of the table or whatever, you know. Yeah. It was a lot of things happening, a lot of support systems like falling out, and like, you know, if I'm and like, boy, that can feed my paranoia. Like, what the hell is out to get? Something's out to get me, you know. But, or I can say, I can't go there. But to speak to, yeah, he had his martial arts, and then there was a sort of failed romance, and I was like, you know, and he didn't feel like he could go back there anymore. And I just was like, you know, I get to think, I'm like, you know, you want to play God, you want to, like, you read this book and you want to like change these things and want to go back, and then it's like, and then I just get humbled. I'm all like, this is bigger than me, but I'm just glad I can read about it, because it really helped me to sort of like be grateful and to get my head straight and kind of go like, I'll read it again and I'll have a different interpretation, because things happen, and then like surprising things happen, and there's awesome stories in it. It's really a great read, and I think going back and reading again, I can find a new perspective on it, which I think I felt that Times article was sort of like praised you and then sort of praised the book and then sort of like trashed it in a way. And then if my understanding at the last sentence was like, it lacks insight, I was like, well, maybe they mean it lacks like a nice, neat conclusion of like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like, I think that the difficulty of the subject matter of like not being able to know who the heroes and the villains are, the moral ambiguity is what makes it compelling and what makes it worth a second read. What you want to say?
I mean, it just came out, and I've started, and I got this with another book that I wrote where I'd written about what men are in the prison I work with, and I start to get like kind of nasty sort of hate mail about, you must be a sicko, there must be something wrong with you hanging out with all these psychos, and then I realized that like, oh, the majority of people don't think like that. The majority of people are sympathetic to what they perceive as the obvious victims, and not to the perpetrator. Like, it's black and white, it's one or the other, and that's what most true crime is like as well. That there's like, there's the victim and the perpetrator, and just like in the hospital, there's doctors and patients, and there's nothing in between. And it's not more of a continuum. I think it's scary for people to think of it that way, because it suggests that we could be either,
Yeah.
and doctors could be the patients as they are in here, and the patient the doctor.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's not like people are set in a particular position, but that those positions are mutable and flexible. And people don't believe that, I guess.
You're right. It scares them. No one wants to say this terrifies me. I don't like the truth of the messiness of the moral ambiguity. This terrifies me, and I have to run to a narrative that gives me comfort. I mean, that's why I sort of sit in a lot of, I have mostly nonfiction books, but I also think the fact that I'm used to being in terror as a kid, and like, and I'm like, I think, I'm revisiting to sort of either master it or because it's familiar to me, and then I can find some sort of like, I can become, I mean, it's like Jung talks about, integrating the shadow and so forth. And like, he actually said that alcoholism, it's a shadow that's I forget what it's called. You can't take it in. It's this such a power that you have to surrender to alcoholism. And the first step is admitting powerlessness, and your life has become unmanageable. And like, that's the irony of it. And I forget, it's not integratable. I mean, he actually talked about, like, there was an alcoholic who came to Freud, but Freud was like, I'm too busy. Why don't you talk to Jung? And Jung was like, you're dealing with a shadow that's unprocessable. What?
Yeah.
What?
Unassimilable, I think. Unassimilable.
Yeah, that you kind of have to say no. This is something I just have to say no to. But then it's been feeding like your spirit and your soul. It's been calming those terrors of like, and
I think what's interesting in Brian's case is like his father, when his father stopped drinking, things got worse for a long time, because the alcohol, he was using the alcohol to make him feel things, like feel more emotional and feel connected, and to help him sleep. And so, like, in most narratives, it's like someone goes to AA and stops drinking and then everything improves, whereas in fact, it can be the opposite.
It's true. And it broke my heart, but I was not surprised. I was like, because it's something deeper. And that's what I learned, because I had to heal those parts of me, or, I was in trouble. and I had to say, do I want peace overall? And when I wanted, because I was like, I don't understand why I don't live in a world where I can go to a doctor and say, I just want to be euthanized. I'm in a tremendous amount of pain. It's not anybody's fault, and I just don't want to be here. I'm not. And I still sort of believe that. I was like, so like, this is like this crazy place that I'm not really cool with. And I'm like, I didn't choose to be here. And I think that's what appeals a lot to with Gnosticism, with this idea that in Gnosticism, there's this demiurge that's created this crazy place. And that, I think, and I've never liked board games. I've never liked games. I never had liked life as a game. It was always like, I don't want to play these games. And it's like there was something, and I think, because I think I knew as a kid, there are these, deadly things going on, and like everyone's not talking about it. And there are these, unanswerable questions that people, in adolescence, you just grow out of, or you become occupied with something else and you just forget them. But or you become a philosopher and like write all this jargon that no one can understand.
I think people sometimes will use the word sophomoric as a put down for things, but what they really mean is like, sophomores kind of stay up all night debating existential issues, and then you grow out of that and you don't do it anymore. But that's the meaning of life. I mean, nothing could be more important. It's just that you have to walk the dog and pay your taxes, and so like you haven't got time to think about those greater questions anymore. But ideally, one would spend all your life thinking about those questions. I mean, what else could be more important?
I know, and it's because we move on because it's unanswerable, and then life takes over. But maybe they're not. Maybe they are answerable to the individual. Who knows? I mean, I'm not saying by saying they're unanswerable, that's another excuse to say let's move on.
Yeah, I guess it's not unanswerable, but like, if you decided that we actually all were just, a brain in a jar creating these illusions like Plato's cave, then the next step is, well, so what? Like, there's nothing you can do about it. So you still have to kind of go on, or like Nietzsche's idea of the eternal return. I mean, you sometimes think about that. Like, you could be living your life for the 100th time or the 300th time, and everything that happens to you is going to happen again and again and again. But then the next step is to say, well, if that's the case, then right now I'm living, we've done all this before. So if I don't remember it, it doesn't mean there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to go on with it.
Yeah. I was like, and then I would read a lot of Robert J. Lifton. Do you know him? He's a sort of psychohistorian. He's delved into like Nazi doctors and the survivors of Hiroshima, and like, it's like, if you're not depressed now, read those, because it's like, but I think he's still alive and kicking and so forth. And my point is, I can't remember what it was.
Well, I was reading recently an account of I think it was a British explorer who was like in the Shackleton expedition or something like that, and was trapped in this polar ice floe, and it was like polar night and waiting to be rescued. And he said that things didn't actually get worse, they kind of got better. It was like the first couple of nights were the worst, but then he kind of got used to his isolation and was hallucinating and didn't really like necessarily want to be rescued. And I think that's something we forget when we think about people like in Brian's situation, or people who've been in prison for 20 or 30 years. It's like they've forgotten what it's like to be on the outside, and it becomes their ordinary daily reality. So it's not like every day is full of horror. It's like every day is the same.
And or that becomes
the past is so long ago that it's forgotten. There's a really good book about the Holocaust by Imre Kertész. It's called Fateless, and it's about him being taken to a concentration camp as a kid, and people afterwards said like, oh, how could you stand it? And he said it was like going down a step. You get used to this step, then you go to another step and you get used to that. And looking back, it's this huge descent, but at the time it's so incremental that you don't really notice like things getting slightly worse and things getting slightly worse. And
It becomes, yeah, it's like there's a certain shift of acceptance where you give up maybe the story that you've told yourself about what the situation is, and you take on a new story, not maybe intellectually, but I think it's part of, I don't know if it's the right hemisphere or whatever, or biochemical shift of I mean, the thing is with the steps is that it is supposed to create a spiritual awakening, which I think, and I don't know if any doctors have like hooked people up and like measured a spiritual awakening. And I know that, cults can induce one. I mean, if you've seen Ticket to Heaven, it's the Mooney thing, and they just like deprived him of sleep and they gave him low protein. And it was the idea of brainwashing. I mean, that's another book Robert J. Lifton was like fundamental on, or like a breakthrough. Like he wrote this big book about brainwashing in China, and then he even spoke at Patty Hearst's. But that was more like mind control is more like is more, yeah, it's less covert, it's less physical, and it's more psychological, and we're using deception, and you're going into a situation where you feel like you're surrounded by friends, and that you're at a friendly environment, and there's the love bombing, but they have an ulterior motive. But in their mind, they feel justified to lie to the unbeliever or the unsaved in order to save them, because there's a
yeah. And I think this, what Brian's going through, is very, very similar, because it's like there are so many regime changes in the hospital, so many vocabulary means so many different things, that it, and not deliberately, but it becomes like this cult situation where you have to, you gradually lose touch with the outside world, and so the only people are the people in the hospital, and they are kind of informing on each other, and you never know what the doctors are thinking about you. And if you talk about things, that goes in your file. If you don't talk about things, that goes in your file, and everything becomes symptomatic. And that's why Brian and some of the other patients I talked to said they'd rather be in prison, because at least you have agency, and if you do something, it's seen as like your choice. And if you don't go to breakfast, it's not, that's, you don't want to go for breakfast, that's a normal human reaction. It's not like noted in your file to be used against you as a
it doesn't become pathologized.
Right.
And that struck me when, I think his name was Peter, who said,
Robert, yeah.
It was like part of your reading group, and you wanted him to write something because you found him imaginative, and he said no way. He's like, everything, and he's like repeating the Miranda rights, like everything you say can and will be used against you. And he's not wrong. I mean, I think within that situation, my instincts told me that I have to submit, and I have to give up authority to the hospital. And looking back, it was the right thing for me to do. And that all my, my inner child, or whatever you want to call it, my soul, my spirit, whatever you want to call it, just wanted to run. It was just like, it just wanted to run. And it's like, I realized not either. And I wanted to run even when I was out of the hospital. And I realized there's something up here. I'm not, and alcoholics call it being restless, irritable, and discontent. And like, there's a spectrum, and I know there is. And I basically did the steps for my mental health, so I wouldn't have to be, and I'm on a bit of a medication now, but it's like, but I'm with it. I needed to sort of get out of that situation and be able to work with people who trusted me, and that knew that, because when I can't trust my mind, I need to go into the hospital. And if I really think I can't trust my mind, then I need to go in and just do what they say, however kooky it might be. But I mean, I can't, my case and Brian's case is like, eons apart. But I mean, I think there's still the same kind of animal. There's something there. And I would rather approach it as a human being rather than looking from above, and I think I like that about your book. I like it. It sort of started as a typical true crime book with the cops getting a report and so forth, and then it follows up with his upbringing, and which is horrendous and tragic, and like, and then you come into the story, and I was okay with it being from your point of view, because I was like, I actually, because you can actually, um, at least I know it's coming from your point of view, and I don't have to agree with it or argue it with it.
Yeah.
And I can agree with it at times, and I can change my opinion, but it's like I'm hearing from an individual who's speaking their truth, however imperfect. I'm not getting lectured about someone who's above all this situation and sort of talking down. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I think it's because I've been like on both sides. Like I've been hospitalized and I've been a therapist. So like I've seen it from both ends. And I remember when I was hospitalized, like one of the like the doctors would ask me, you know, how are you doing? Are you still depressed? And I realized I had to like answer them in such a way that made it clear that I sounded sane and stable without sounding as though I'm trying to sound that I'm sane and stable, you know? And it becomes this very difficult like negotiation that you have to make between being natural and honest and then making sure that it doesn't seem like you're too consciously trying to say the right thing. And um, and it's almost impossible. And I think, you know, switch the situation and the doctors would have a harder time of it. And the fact that there is a doctor who's mentally ill without that people don't seem to realize just suggests how kind of interchangeable these positions are.
And how vulnerable we are. I mean, one of the things when I made the film about cults is that I didn't want, like, I didn't want the actors to act crazy, and I didn't want them to like look like anything. I wanted them to just give a flat reading, because I didn't, because because I think we're all vulnerable, and I think I think we're actually at a better position if we understand that we're vulnerable, and
And there's
and
something really tempting about turning yourself over to a cult or a commune or even like a mass movement. Like there's something appealing about the idea of just, you know, having this fantasy family, an ideal family where everyone is kind of on your side and is going to protect you and look after you, and you know, whatever you have to do, it's for, I guess it's like a fantasy of having a dictator tell you what to do, and you don't have to necessarily wrestle with all these really difficult moral decisions yourself. Like you just sign away the say, I believe in this, and everything else is laid out for you.
and I think it speaks to the inner child. I mean, no one wants to talk about, like, you know, it's like I talk about the inner child, and I can be called psychotic. It's like, but it's just what I cast that part of myself. You're going to call it the soul. There's no soul. What's the spirit? I don't know. It's like, but but if you don't deal with it, it'll, you know, it's something. And I think it speaks to that young part of oneself where optimistic. If it hasn't been killed, if it hasn't been destroyed by the outside, if it hasn't gone underground, and God knows what can happen if that hopeful, like, I've tried to keep myself with that optimism and stuff. I've tried to save that, and I was like, that's why I didn't want to have a family. I just wanted to have what I loved, which was, and what saved me when I was growing up. I didn't drink because I made films, and I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I would see like 2001 and read about Stanley Cooper. I was like, this is the coolest thing in the world. I saw Maya Deren making an amazing film, Meshes of the Afternoon, with like two people and like outdoors in a home. I was like, you can do awesome things. Or like hearing a song and going like, what?
How old were you when you made Mind Control?
I was in 1999, so I was 30, I don't know, 6 or something. I was 37. And I'd seen Ticket to Heaven, and I was so impressed by it, because it was that I wanted to get this message across. And I'd got a book by Steve Hassan, who was actually in the Moonies, and his book was the most was the best part of research for making that film. And I wanted to do like a narrative film with like people and stuff like that, but I was like, I couldn't afford it. And so I was like, made this sort of this instructional film instead, and sort of like inspired by Monty Python or something. And I just wanted to get this information out, because I realized that, everything that's spiritual and everything that's, because I was watching a lot of public access shows on Manhattan. This was sort of before the internet, and there were a lot of like either channelers or gurus or whatever. And I was like, it was all beautiful, but I was like, these could be fronts for cults, and I wanted people to know that it might be like seem nice on the outside, but it could be, sort of like taking my paranoia and fear of groups and like making it into like a warning of like, to not be, I don't know, just to see how, like, just to show how these things work. And because that was like, it was like a nightmare to think that, that that I could be hijacked and like have into a new family when and then have that family be a nightmare at the end of it or whatever. And
Yeah.
maybe me not even knowing it's a nightmare, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
But I mean, a lot of the people who like those channels and things would not have seen themselves as doing anything malicious, or even have seen themselves as cult leaders, but would have seen themselves as people who are helping humanity. And so it's like only from the outside really that the cult is a cult.
Well, no, I mean, that's for me, it was like, don't judge the outside, because the deeper you get in, and that you can get sucked in, and you won't even know that you end up doing, things against your own ethics that you had before you came in. And you might not even, so it's like, it might look good on the outside, but like here, here's a way of looking out for the warning signs.
Not just your own ethics, but doing things that are harmful to you, like psychologically and physically, or things that are do things that are not in your best interest. But because I think we often do that anyway, like we're unconsciously self-destructive, so it's a way of like mobilizing that impulse.
Yeah, I mean, or hijacking it.
Yeah, hijacking it. Yeah.
But I think, yeah, it's just something I just was like,
in a cult, you were never in a cult.
Besides my mother's, my alcoholic family,
Yeah.
Because I bought into her. There was nothing physically. The world was not ending. We weren't, there was no, it's just like Brian's home, they could pay their mortgage, and the father had a good job, and there was no material, like, they weren't living in poverty, if I understand it correctly, even though the house was a mess, but spiritually and mentally it was and even diseased.
And the parents themselves, like they loved the children, and they themselves were the product of previous generations who were themselves mentally ill, without being diagnosed. And so it's really a case of the sins of the fathers, and I think that it's like the seed of mental illness is passed on like that from.
I have alcoholism and mental illness in my family, so it wasn't. That's another reason why I was like, don't drink. I knew I had, the Collins curse. Like, I keep thinking that Dark Shadows is like there's this alcoholism parallel, and I always think there's a connection between the occult and alcoholism, with Crowley coming from making all that, their family making money on their ale house, and I don't know, but I mean there's, and that he actually became addicted, and then thought that if there was a religious or spiritual answer to addiction, which I think he was kind of right about, but it was so messy and screwed up, because it's like, and the whole idea of like the crowned and conquering child, like it's almost like he got in touch with his inner child, but like the inner child, it's like the higher power that will restore me to sanity. That's the second step, or came to believe in a higher power that will restore me to sanity. So there's a sanity clause within these steps. So it's like, And it's like, there is a choice. It's like, if I'm going to deal with that inner child or whatever that is, or my soul, I'm going to have to clean it up, because it's going to be, it's going to have physical life. It's going to have life damaging consequences to me and other people. And I was like, I don't live in a world where I can go to a doctor and just have them take me out. It was like,
Yeah.
that's considered insane, even though it might completely make sense to me with all the, with my, you know, because with having depression, it's like, you know, every joy is taken away repeatedly. And yeah,
People can still, you know, jump out of windows, and there's always suicide. I mean, it's not as.
I couldn't do it. Yeah, I couldn't. I
But
couldn't do it.
I don't know if you know the movie The Lost Weekend. I think it's Robert Mitchum, maybe. And
Ray
it's based
Milland. It's Ray
on
Milland
Milland,
and
yeah,
Billy Wilder. I started to
right.
watch it, but yeah.
That book, I mean, it's a great movie, but it's based on this book, The Lost Weekend by Charles Jackson, which is, I think, the best book about alcoholism, because it really gives the sense of like not just the horrors of it, but the joy and the pleasure of like where the main character will go to a bar and have one drink and then start to kind of gradually see himself differently and see himself as like an interesting person, and the future will be full of possibilities. And it's, you know, most books about addiction show you the dark side, but the dark side is dark because it's so good, you know, because it's so pleasurable, and you don't really see the pleasurable side. I mean, I like to drink and don't have any, well, probably addiction in my family, but not alcoholism. But I've known people who are obviously alcoholics, where like it's not they can take it or leave it, but it's like if you have one drink, it's like a door opening and they go through the door, and that's it. Like
Yeah.
it's not you can have one, but it's like a binary, you know, all or
Yeah.
not.
I
And
mean,
when
you have to, yeah, an alcoholic has to self-identify. I self-identify, and all I need is a desire to stop. Even though I was stopped for 7 years, I was like, look, there's this medical model that says it's a chemical imbalance, and I'm like, this is just dulling whatever I am, and just like a blunt instrument. And even, you know, a psychiatrist said it, and even in your book, I think it's just like, it's like it's like a very, I mean, it's unsubtle, and it's like it sort of dulls things, but I need it at a certain point to be dulled. And that was okay, because I can say that now because I've come out from under it. But when I went to a meeting and I heard this guy's story, and he was talking about alcohol, but it was like he was running away from whatever, and it was within him. And wherever he ran, he was there. And he had sort of this miraculous story. And I was like, if this program can do this for this guy, take an impossible situation as like maybe, and it, you know, it could probably do something for my, you know, quote unquote mental illness, or, you know, just get me right with reality, which is basically what it comes down to. Because I was fighting, as they say, life on life's terms. And I was like, there was a story that I told myself that I would become after I left my home. I was like, this is what the story is going to happen. And I knew actually inside that's not going to happen. And when it didn't happen, and when things didn't go my way, like a child, you know, I got peeved, and I was like, and I thought, oh, I could just, you know, suicidally ideate and then sublimate it with songs and stuff. And at a certain point I had, no, I can't. And I did these steps because I was like, what other choice did I have? And it was like, and because I really didn't want to, and I still consider myself an atheist. You know, I still don't think there is a moral overview. I think that heaven and hell are here. I don't think there's an afterlife. And I am able to have these personal beliefs and still be part of this program and do the spiritual side. And I think it's taken me all this time of research because I've, you know, you know, there are dangers, and I went when I needed to, and that's what happens. It's like nobody can get anybody sober. You have to like get to a certain point and hit bottom, and it's not always what the physical tragedy is that makes people hit bottom and say I need to. It's a lot of it has to do with their conversation within themselves of like,
Yeah.
okay, this isn't. I'm going on a path that is going to kill me, and do I care? And like it's
Yeah.
part of, as they call it, grace. Sometimes it's like I do care, and a lot of times it's because there was so
Did you
it
do, were you
brought
into any other drugs as well, or just alcohol? Was alcohol the main
just
problem?
alcohol. It was like I was always considered weird as I was a kid, and people have said, you know, you're an acid casualty who never took acid. But it was just like, you know, I had debilitating depression. I was like, I know you through Mark, and I would go to Underground Film Festival and be really depressed and stay at Mark's house, which was very nice. And one time he couldn't believe it because I was so depressed I missed my own screening, and Mark's like, you missed your own screening, because I was living in New York and I made the trip all the way to go to Chicago Underground to screen my but I was just like,
But I
so
feel like a lot of the people who are writers and artists, but like on the underground or fringy side of things, are like they are people like you and I who kind of have found a way of making art out of this confusion and sometimes mental illness or addiction, or have found a way to like direct it into um, to sublimate it into art and culture. And that's why there's the the work is so interesting, I feel. And like I feel like you don't get that kind of edge in much mainstream work at all.
well, they're it's all, you know, it's a market model. They're not, I'm speaking, I mean, I had an argument with one person recently who was like, oh, you should market, you know, market yourself as the weird guy, you know, that's your brand, and you should, you know, monetize your YouTube. And I was like, a long time ago I separated what I do as an artist and what I do to pay the rent. And I was like, those don't meet. And I was like, you're kidding yourself if you can make a living on YouTube. And I would be chasing how many views and so forth. And I even said, you know, I serve the cinema gods. You know, those are who I'm
Yeah,
speaking to.
and
You know,
that's why I was looking forward to talking to you, because um, it seemed like you know you talk to people because you're interested in having a conversation with them, not because you're trying to appeal like to some imaginary audience out there, like this is going to be marketable or getting likes or views. And I really, that's a real problem for me, because I just hate that kind. I can't really do any of that social media stuff. And a lot of people were telling me like, oh, there's all these like people on Twitter who are weirdos and loners, and like, but if they have all these followers and they're so good at tweeting, like how can they really be so different from, it's still like a herd mentality.
yeah. Well, I feel like, you know, before, if I didn't have filmmaking when I was a kid in that kind of like emotional hell. I mean, I never remembered, like my brother remembers stuff with my mother growing up that I don't remember, and I remember stuff that he doesn't remember. And I never remember my mother being physically abusive, but he recounted to me, you know, we were down in the basement and she was raging and coming down. I mean, it was rare because she was large, and it was rare that she'd come down the steps because she might actually fall because she was drunk. But she had made it down the steps, so she must have been pissed off enough, because usually the basement was our safe area. And she came and she broke all of our toys, and she screamed at us to not all, you know, broke whatever we were, and screamed at us to, you know, clean it up. And then my brother's on the ground and we're crying. And when he was on the ground, he said that she kicked him. And I don't remember this incident, but it was interesting because it was after the steps, and like I could tell that he was still that child remembering that, and I was seeing it from above in a weird way of like, if you'd be able to see my
The things that happen to you at that age are so profound and long lasting, and it's just amazing how, you know, someone in the 60s or 70s can be triggered by a raised voice or a sudden noise, and that goes back to something that happened when they were really young. That there's always going to be there, like there's you can learn about it, but you can't overcome it.
yeah, and it's different for different people too. I mean, it's like it's something you can't say, well, this happened and then it always comes
Yeah,
out with this
yeah,
result. It's like
yeah.
they call, you know, say the cunning, baffling, and powerful nature of alcoholism. I think it's still chasing that a moving target. So that's why it can't be. That's why treating it as a disease, you know, or a material model is so difficult, because it's kind of a moving target. And like what triggers one person won't always trigger the other person. So, but I feel like it does spiritual damage to me. And I mean, I was like, what the hell does spiritual mean? I was like, I read some Kierkegaard for beginners, and it's a matter of like, okay, I'm going into a strange situation, and I'm gonna automatically, project what it might be like, and that's a leap of faith. And like, am I going to be safe there? Am I going to be welcomed there? And what's the story I'm telling myself? And it has to do with like what my level of primal trust or primal mistrust of the world is. And that, I mean, I know there's nature and nurture there, but the environmental things is that if you have, Prince Charming, and you put him in a situation growing up where nothing, where he can't, there's no where the primal trust has been ruptured, and any sense of safety or any sense of consistency has been ruptured. So he's going to project going into or I will project going into a new situation that there might be danger, so it's like.
And I think that's one of the problems. I mean, this is kind of marketed as a true crime book, and that's the reason for the title too. But the problem with most true crime is that like there are these set points where there's the victim and the perpetrator, and not an understanding that being a victim is what makes someone a perpetrator usually, and that these are the same person just at different points on the spectrum. So Brian the victim, it becomes Brian the perpetrator, and you don't have those like fixed load points like you do in most true crime, where there aren't, the doctors, they're not evil, they're not trying to be harmful, they're doing what
Right.
they believe is right, but the medical system is so overwhelming with the insurance companies and how much money there's in it, and all the kind of complexities that go along with that, and the overcrowding of hospitals, that they just become, you have to build these barriers to kind of human understanding, or you just be completely overwhelmed.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's not a Frank Capra movie, man. I mean, it's, the good guy doesn't triumph over the corrupt system. And it's like, that's what like my inner child will like. And I guess, and it's like when my wife and I watch these pre-code movies, and like, they talk about, money for sex and sleeping your way to the top, or that, or powerful, women like taking charge, and like, or drinking or crime. And it's like, then the code comes, and then you're like, we don't want to portray life, as it really is in its murky moral morass, or whatever, in its ambiguity or whatever, or in its complexity. And we want to be able to tell these comforting stories, which, can make a kid go to sleep at night, I guess. But it's like, it's not necessarily reality. And we kind of need both, I think, in order not to fall into despair.
And I think what most true crime is, it's like post-code movie, where the cops are the good guys and they're going to come in at the end and arrest the perpetrator and put him behind bars, and not go any further than that, and considers what happens after that, and that what happens for the rest of his life. But it depends. Some people believe that art is the point of art is to reflect a kind of world that the best in us and in our world, so something that we can model ourselves on, and that represents the heights of our being human, the way that like a king is the best human, or used to be. The monarch was considered the supreme height of humanity,
and divine,
yeah, divine,
or
right?
partial or whatever.
But I mean, I like art that reflects things as they are, and perhaps even goes down into the depths and shows the part that you don't really ordinarily see, because it's not really considered interesting or appealing to look at.
I mean, it's uncomfortable. It's like, but I mean, I think it's important for people to get out of comfort zone, not in a sadistic way, but in a way of like understanding another person's another. It's like to understand the humanity of even the worst of us, and that there's a tragedy, and I mean it helped me it helped me be grateful for what I had, and it helped sort of set my humble me in a certain way and say like my inner child like wants to like rescue all these people, and in an
Yeah.
ideal world. And I think there's certain stories that inner child likes because he's idealistic and he's a magical thinker. And I'm like, and I'm not saying that or like I could talk about my spirit, like my spirit or my principles are hopeful, or that I have aspirations. I don't necessarily have to. It doesn't matter what you call it, but there's a dimension that is kind of like you can't really name. I mean, what you know uh, you can't really put into words. If a piece of music like moves you and makes you feel and fills you somehow like with oxygen, and you could say like, oh well, certain serotonin is like, well, why is it being triggered? Oh, because of. But it's like, and I choose to see it as an inner child, which can both, if I wound it's like I wanted to divorce my wife, and I was like, I don't have any grounds. Like, she
Yeah.
hasn't cheated on me. There's no physical altercations or anything like that. It's like I can't go to a judge and say like she wounded my inner child. I want a divorce. It's like it's absurd. It's like, so I have to parent that kid or that part of myself and kind of go like, okay, and not try to make the world what I need it to be.
Yeah. Well, not projected onto other people. And
Yeah.
I think like psychiatry is seen as a sort of subset of medicine now, and mental illness as a subset of physical illness. And like partly that's a good thing in the sense that like it's important to take it as seriously and to give the same kind of insurance reimbursements and that kind of thing. But there's no like biomarker for a lot of these illnesses, and they are to do with the spirit, the being human, just human existence and the dilemmas of human existence. And in the past, we would have seen it as a kind of philosophical dilemma, but now it's become like a subset of medicine, and you're put in a hospital and treated with antipsychotics, which basically, like alcohol, is like hitting someone over the head with a hammer. So yes, the pain is numb, but everything else is numb too, and there's all kinds of side effects. So it works, but at what
I would
cost?
my experience was always like, well, not always, but I kind of came to the conclusion is that it's a chemical straitjacket. I felt immobilized, and I was like, and then one of the patients, I don't know, was it Cliff or someone said um,
That he takes
that I'm
drugs that other people can do
for
what?
other people, so other people can,
Yeah.
and there is that separation of because it's like the alcoholic will be having a great time. I was working at a customer service situation, and a woman came in. She was really drunk, but she was just complaining, bitching, and moaning. I mean, you'd think on the surface that she was having a shitty day, and I just knew well enough not to buy into it, to just be pleasant with her. And she's like, "All right, well, good," and like be very light, but she was
Yeah.
just bitching and moaning. She was like, and then on her way out, she was really pleasant to me, and I'm like, "Have a great day." It was like, because I didn't. And then I realized, underneath her bitching and moaning, she was having the greatest time.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing. It's like the alcoholic can sometimes like be feeling fine, but then be doing damage and then not knowing. I mean, the rest of the steps are like taking a look at myself and like cleaning house and like, okay, I might not believe that there's a moral like good guy upstairs orchestrating things, but there's reality. There's just life, and it's just like
Yeah.
real. And I was like, I have to like clean up my mess and like maybe live by the principles that I wished this God lived by, and just say, well, this is how the principles I want to live by, and I'm going to clean my own uh,
And I think
mess. What?
partly and that's one of the good things about at least being in a hospital, is that these patients have to be around other people and all the time. And so like I was reading this the letters of James Cain, and he was an alcoholic, and like he drank so much that he was so shy and introverted around other people that he needed to drink to be around people, but he couldn't, he couldn't just drink a little bit, that he always got far too drunk. And I think there's a danger of like if you have a mental illness and you're outside the hospital, you can get very isolated and be reluctant to engage with other people because of your paranoia or whatever. And then you can lose track of your own interactions and not understand what's coming from you, what's a projection and what's actually coming from outside. So there's something to be said for, and I'm sure that's the same principle in AA, to like be around other people, talk to them, get to know their story, and let them set you right when you're fantasizing or you think that you're having a really hard time, like you are, but then everyone else is too, and you have to take accountability for your own failings. You can't
Right.
you can't blame others or the hospital or your illness.
And at a meeting, the brilliant thing is that there's no crosstalk. It's like you get healed by listening to your story and someone else and seeing that they got sober and that their life got better, and like, or you hear something that's, dormant within you, that's either hopeful or something, or that a loneliness or whatever, that sort of that door gets open when you hear someone else. It's not necessarily that they say, this is what you have to do, because they're all suggestions. They realize that the alcoholic has to hit bottom when they've hit bottom, and they have to, it'll only work if they're like, look, I'm at wit's end here, and I can't trust my own brain or whatever, and or my own, I can't drink safely just to keep it in, and when I drink, I don't know what's going to happen to me, and I don't know what I'm going to do to people, and there was a certain, epiphany where I was like, I can't keep doing this, or I'm going to hurt, kill myself or someone else. And that here's a group of people who have found recovery, and that they're speaking, they're telling my story. There's a lot of like, but without telling people what to do. It's a matter, like, because there's no crosstalk. You're not supposed to necessarily give advice, and you usually get a sponsor. And so there's the one-on-one, and the sponsor's been through the steps and guides you through the steps, and that's really important. Like, I try to do it on my own by just meditating on the steps. It's like it went so far, and then I was just like, I need to do it, and I really did it for my mental health, and I really did it because alcoholism is is in my family, and I was like, and I learned the hard way that has a spiritual dimension, whatever that means. It's like I was just at war with myself and others, and I was like, I can only sublimate so far, and it's like, and I need to get right. But
I think most of the problems of human life come from that, like negotiating a distance between ourselves and other people, and like how to live around other people without being affected them, like the family that you're describing, like with your mother. Like that, in a family you don't have any choice when you're a kid, but as an adult you do have a choice, and you can isolate or you can surround yourself by other people. But people have their problems. I mean, it's Schopenhauer's porcupine dilemma, where porcupines are trying to sleep and they're pressing each other with their quills, and then they move apart and they get cold and they move back again. And like, although I've been told porcupines don't live together, apparently. So Schopenhauer didn't know that.
I think it's like, I make a distinction between isolating and solitude. Whether if I'm isolating, I'm sort of afraid of people and situations, and I can't deal with them, and I haven't. And it basically, when I'm with someone else, I have to face myself. Ultimately, I have to see myself, and I don't always like what I see. And if I'm alone, I can keep that at bay, my self-hatred, or I can sublimate it. It's usually when I'm around other people. But I mean, if I'm
like, you can't, it's healthy to see it, even if you don't like it. You can't go without seeing it for too long.
Yeah, and it helps me, because emotional sobriety is what basically I was using the steps for. And I'd been to 12-step meetings before, and I just used them as talk therapy, and it's just to sort of lift the emotional burden. And that was the difference between me and my friend in high school, who was like, I don't want to talk about it, and he's dead today, and maybe he's better off. I don't know. I mean, he's certainly, I can't judge, but just by his action, you've got to by setting himself on fire. I mean, it's like you've got to that implies that there was some shit going down.
I always like talking about things too, but I also kind of appreciate that like repression is there for a purpose, and there's a lot of things that you need to repress, and as you get older, it's kind of, the less appeal talking about things has. And I think that, like, I kind of admire people who can, I guess it's like if you're devoted to something, a task, like instead of talking about something, if you can get on with your day and get absorbed in something, and that helps you forget about it, then that's just as useful as talking about it. I mean, there are things that I can't get out of my head and have to talk about, but some people seem to be able to do it with no ill effect. So it's not talking isn't for everyone, but I think repression has its uses.
Yeah, I was actually with my last therapist, or the therapist before this one. He actually said I had too much therapy, and he was like, "You got to." Yeah, he said, "You got to get a sponsor and get a sponsor and join AA." And it's like, he said, "You've had too much therapy. You're just talking about it." Well, he was retiring. Yeah, I mean, and then he said, "You're okay," and I wasn't okay, but I didn't kill anybody, and I didn't kill myself, and I'm okay today. I'm like, I'm not here to like compare my life to Brian's. I'm just like, I just think there are echoes in this, and it's a spectrum. And I think it's easy to say, oh, this could never be me. And I think people are afraid of their vulnerability. But I think, yeah, as Dirty Harry said, a man's or a person's got to know his limitations, and that and having humility. I don't know. It's just like I was almost like, when I read the book, I was like, I'm not qualified to speak about this, but I have so many things to say, but I would rather speak from my own experience and how, because it's an extreme case. It's like,
yeah, it is, and it's not, and most people don't stay in the hospital for this long.
Yeah.
And it's kind of baffling to me why he's still there, but I also know that could be me, and it's just kind of fortune and accident that I'm not in that situation, and we're as likely to be perpetrators as we are victims. And there's just a very fine line between someone who's a criminal and not a criminal. It's not like you're born evil or anything. It's just a
yeah, I saw this movie, or I haven't watched it yet, but we need to talk about Kevin. What is it? We need to talk about Kevin or something.
Yeah.
Did you see it?
No, but I read it's based on a really good book.
Yeah. And that, I don't know, my armchair without reading the book or seeing the movie was like, that this idea of evil is just this isolated thing. When you read, and I even came in sort of naively when I read descriptions of your book, thinking like, oh, this is just this isolated. And then I realized that he's surrounded by sickness, and then it was not, and even there were pockets of air, of spiritual air, that were, by circumstance or fate, were shut to him. And it was like, no one, I mean, the thing is like, I don't know, don't be walking around with a gun if you, it's like, yeah, that was the like, that's where you kind of like, yeah.
I talked to his attorney, and he said that like, he just couldn't believe like where it's a terrible crime, but like what was going through the mind of these parents, that like their kid was walking around like taking a gun into the shower. What parents?
Did they know it?
Yeah, they knew it.
Yeah.
His father said Brian was like constructing a dummy and dressing it in his clothes.
Right.
And they thought it was like Brian had this paranoia about outsiders, and he was smoking to
Ah,
and they never thought, what if it's turned on us?
wow. Jesus Christ. This is a hell of a story, is what I'm telling you. So, what else is going on? You have a new book or a new idea or
I've been I've been working on some fiction for a long time, and I like it and I'm happy with it, but and my agent kind of likes it now, but everyone says it's too dark, and I don't think it's dark at all. But
yeah.
like I realize that my compasses must be so different from everyone else's. Like I think it's like, well, I don't see it as being dark or disturbing at all, but I guess I'm so used to dark, disturbing things that I have forgotten what the average person is like, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a lot of times when people from the outside will look and say like, "Oh, they're depressed." Well, look what they're listening to or look what they're reading. And as a person who's had depression much of his life, it's like my is that it's more about harmony with this, a communion with this, rather than the music making me depressed. It's more like I feel less alone, or I'm like, it's sort of like you resonate with it, and I guess I don't know what, that serves, evolutionarily or what, but it's more a matter of you feel less alone, you feel this communion,
It's
and
the
you
person,
feel,
the person that made that, whether it's a film or a piece of music or a book, they felt the way that you were feeling, or that they put their finger on something that you're experiencing, and it's like making you feel less alone, and you realize that like it's not it's not just, this thing isn't just happening to me, it's like a part of being human.
and then I could also, because yeah, I would see films that would inspire me to want to make films or at least be part of that. Like even if, you know, I failed, at least I'm in a realm that I think is wonderful, and that's given me hope, because I think I felt most safe as a kid in the dark in a theater, and I could see, what I could sort of play out, see what adult life was supposed to be. I mean, my father was an alcoholic, but he wasn't as abusive as my mother. He was sort of a witness, and I'm glad he didn't leave. And he took me to R-rated movies when I was a kid, which I really, and I actually saw Cuckoo's Nest when I was 13, and I saw like Serpico and stuff, and it was like I wanted to see these, and you'd see, grown up like played out before you actually go in, but it's a sort of safe environment.
But it's like a repetition compulsion. You see it happening, and then but it's artificial, so it could happen again and again and again, and like it doesn't have control over you. It's artificial. It's like something that's out there.
Or you
That's
can like see it as a possible future and be able, and that's kind of with my cult movie. It was like, if you see these signs, like, think again, maybe, so you go in and say it might play out this way, but I think it's just like no one wants to talk about fear and terror, the dark night of the soul. I mean, I used to think that darkness like wasn't a dark enough word to describe what I was going through. I mean, before I got verbal, it was all like music that spoke, or like a film that it was, and that I still stammer now because I can't find words, and when I was really in the thick of it, I was like, darkness does not even, it's like that's a cute word for like a really,
yeah.
and then you go and talk and say it's diabolical, and then you sound even crazier, it's like,
But I think I like that. I like to go and sit in a movie theater too on my own, and I loved going watching horror movies from a very early age. And I think it was that, like, here is here is darkness that's interesting and exciting. It's not like the ordinary,
hmm,
dull, monotonous, everyday, boring darkness of the
the
family.
banality of evil.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like evil wearing a more exciting costume. So it showed that you could take that darkness and do something interesting with it and make it appealing and exciting, and then exert control over it.
I
So it's not
remember,
scary.
yeah, or like rehearse it. I mean,
Yeah.
or it's rehearsed. I remember being in high school and seeing Texas Chainsaw and going to my English teacher and saying like, "You've got to see this film," because it was the first time And I think Last House on the Left was the same thing, where it's like he started to be afraid of the filmmakers, not just the people,
Yeah.
people who made the film. And it was like, there was something. And I think I tried, you saw Psychotic Odyssey, that my film about Richard Chase? Did you see that one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I saw that.
That was an extreme. It was like, because I felt everybody was like, oh, they think of a serial killer as this sort of suave mastermind like Ted Bundy. And I wanted to sort of go against that type and have just the mess of that. But also I was, because I was reading true crime more in the 80s, and I hated Silence of the Lambs and what's Anthony Hopkins' portrayal as like the evil guy being evil and like, making noises with his saliva and stuff. And it's like, the more frightening it's like listening to Edmund Kemper, like be really logical. And like,
Yeah.
that's really frightening, where you're like the familiarity of it. But I think that's the actual, but that can make the general public paranoid too. In that I think there's less trust in people. I think people are not getting married and having children. They're doing other things because I don't know. So we're up. What?
Not marrying and having children is a good thing, I think.
Yeah. And I think you can still be of service. You can still like nurture others. You can still like be a good friend. You can still like, but then, that's the thing with like, people like being an uncle or whatever. You can like sit there and hang out, but then you can leave,
Yeah, it's like not getting a purebred dog because there's so many dogs of the pound you can take in and look after. Like,
yeah.
you don't have to have your own, but.
Well, what if we not? Well, we talked like about. I don't know. It's about an hour and a half. It's been a good talk with me. It's just like, I would love to talk about. Well, I always thought, because I'm sensing that probably a good time to end.
Yeah, but we can do another one some other time if you run out of interesting earthlings.
Well, it's like, no, the qualification to be on the show, even though it's not a show, is to be an earthling. I think everybody's interesting, it's like,
they are actually.
So yeah. I have a very, it's not, I'm not promoting anything. I'm just like, the whole bar is like, does my guest or just my friends, are they cool with me posting it? And if they're not, I won't post it. If they are, I'll post it. And then so be it. If 4 people watch it. We had a great conversation. It was great to talk to you. Love the book. I'm going to read it again. And I would love to talk about the occult. That's another one of my obsessions, or not obsessions, but interests. And yes, but I think we're coming to a natural end. Right. But unless you want to say anything in closing.
No, you can post this on YouTube. It's fine.
Okay, you're cool with it. And send me any links that you'd like me to put in the comment section for people to, because I almost like avoided learning so I could come just meet you as a person, and because I met you through Mark, and I like to keep it at that level and just like human and not necessarily professional. And YouTube makes it so easy, just a click away, and COVID's gotten me very used to Zoom, so it's a good opportunity to speak to people from wherever and whenever. So I really enjoyed this talk. I think the book's great, and I wish you the best of luck with it and with everything.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cool. We'll talk again. That sounds good.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.